Hi, Mehul Hari with Developer Express. I'm here with the authors of our new book, Professional Dev Express ASP.NET Controls. So Paul, you wrote the large part of this book on our ASP.NET controls.
That's true. I wrote the big-headed child part.
Now, what experience did you have writing these controls? I mean, how much experience did you have with Dev Express ASP.NET controls before you started this book?
Average, I would say, an average amount of experience, but our developers spend a lot of time producing new content all the time, and so when I get to the point of writing the book, I have to go through sort of an immersion process where I focus on the book for what amounts to a couple of thousand hours, just trying to define a narrative for the book to explain it to our readers.
Okay, so speaking of the narrative, I just wanted to cover some of the chapters in the book and what people can expect out of the book. And I noticed that the book is kind of broken up into three main parts. The part one, well, there's 13 chapters overall. And the first part is grids, editors, navigation, and controls. Now, was that all you? Did you have some aspect
No,
of
it
that?
certainly wasn't me. No, I appear later in the book.
Okay.
So this was all Paul's doing and Paul's writing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So Paul, can you explain?
Blame intended and accepted.
So what can people expect out of that first part?
Well, I focused on the ASPX grid view to begin with because I think that's probably one of our bigger sellers and our customers use that most frequently. And there's a lot of good content there, and there is content that overlaps some of our other controls. So it was a fairly natural choice for me to start with the grid view.
Awesome. And so the first two chapters looks like it's the grid view and then some advanced topics on the grid. What kind of topics are covered in there?
Well, I think you know this story. A few years ago, I wrote a sales product application for the web, and this was before the ASP Ajax controls were released. And this control had to display nested data hierarchies. So we had to do real-time updates and grid nesting and things of that nature, which at the time I did from scratch.
Wow.
And you know, as I revisited and explored the ASPX grid view, I realized that all of that is out of the box for our customers, which makes life a whole lot easier if you have to write a more advanced sort of web application.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so you extended what, the Microsoft control to give all those features?
Yeah, we just started with the regular grid view and did nested grid views and real-time updating with Ajax calls using JavaScript and advanced sorting and image nesting and all of those things. And I did it for the most part by hand.
So were you angry when you realized that you wasted all that time and that's already in the box of the grid view?
No, not
kidding.
Yeah, I know you're kidding. No, I wasn't angry. I was relieved because it's very labor intensive to do, and for the benefit of our customers, they get it again out of the box. So they get the benefit, and they really don't pay for the benefit. There's no correlation between the cost of our DX experience and the ASPX grid view and how much time you would have to spend if you were to create those things on your own. The cost in terms of time and money is phenomenal if you did it by hand.
Now, what about the other editor controls and the navigation controls? How do you approach describing them in a book form?
Well, that's an interesting story. I think every author comes up with their own narrative, and it's unique to that person's experiences and the story you have in your head. So I usually try to start chapters with an anecdotal story, probably for my own sense of enjoyment, and then use that as a segue into maybe this is why it matters, or this is how the story is relevant, perhaps to the reader, as well as try and add some entertainment value.
Yeah, okay, so you just try to make it fun and light to keep it interesting.
Yeah, and technical books aren't always fun or light. It's often they're the exact opposite of fun and light. And I actually write books with the idea that I want people to read them, not just use them as a sort of dictionary.
As a reference or something.
Right. I would rather that they read them and that they enjoy the process of discovery and learn as much as they can.
So this covers all the ASP.NET controls, including the tree list, data view, news control, scheduler, And in the second part, you get into data sources, JavaScript, CSS, and themes. Now,
so comprehensive coverage is what I went for in terms of covering the controls, in terms of the individual controls. In terms of covering all the properties and members for an individual control, obviously we couldn't fit complete and detailed coverage in one book, a 600-plus page book. Our controls are very feature rich, and if you were to just enumerate the members of the ASPX grid view, you would end up with a dictionary, which I think wouldn't serve anybody in particular, other than maybe in a help document format, which is why we've done a very good job with our help documentation for Visual Studio.
right, so you cover things like getting started from just the basics of, binding the grid to some more advanced topics and theming and so forth.
Yeah, I went pretty quick through binding because binding is a sort of an essential first step in every grid you use. You're going to bind it to some sort of data. So there's not a lot of protracted elaboration on data binding. The point of data binding was either to show the different data sources or to get to some more meat in the matter. For example, to get data in the grid and show that our grid comes with an option of row editing or forms editing built in. That nesting is actually inherently easy with our ASPX grid view and things of that nature. And then to get to the built-in filtering and sorting features and the fact that AJAX is an out-of-the-box feature.
So JavaScript is all the hot topic nowadays. And as I understand it, you were the guy?
That was my part, well, one of the first parts of my contribution to the book was the JavaScript section. It wasn't a complete chapter. In essence, talking about how our controls expose themselves to JavaScript, at least on the client side, and how to write good JavaScript rather than just ad hoc type JavaScript. So that was kind of interesting because I'd been researching that myself for my own edification, and being able to write that section was great fun. Actually, it was a hoot, I must admit.
So can I ask, are you approaching it from the aspect that somebody knows JavaScript, or do you kind of
I make the assumption that, as Paul was saying, there's a limit to how much you can put in a book like this. And it's 670 something pages at the moment,
right,
and which I believe is like 40% more than we originally thought it was going to be. So I couldn't give a full tutorial on JavaScript. I had to make some assumption that people actually know JavaScript and know that how to create objects in JavaScript and so on and so forth, and how to extend those objects through adding new members and so on. So that's where I basically approached it from, was how to do a good encapsulation of functionality and behavior and data inside JavaScript, so that you could use that kind of approach to extending our controls and providing more behavior to our controls on the client side.
Can you give maybe one example of what you showed off in the client-side features?
Well, I also not only did the JavaScript side, but I also did the asynchronous communication part of the book. So I was talking about the ability for controls on the client side to talk back to the server and through callbacks and so on and so forth. And obviously, to do that, you have to write quite a bit of JavaScript. So for instance, I created a YouTube player, for example, that you could put into your own applications to play YouTube content. And for that, for example, I basically created a helper class, a helper object, I should say, not class, and encapsulated data within that helper object that was not visible on the outside, so data hiding, and exposed behavior to manipulate the YouTube player through play, pause, skip back, skip forward, and all that kind of stuff.
Oh,
so
cool.
it's a nice way. You don't have to do it that way, but it's a nice way of showing data hiding and encapsulation within JavaScript.
Awesome. All right.
And there's a reason we put JavaScript in a DevExpress book, and the reason is my experience has been that developers are often asked to do many jobs. it's rare that you'll get a JavaScript specialist only on a project. Usually it's the everyday programmer who has to do that. But it ties in with the DevExpress controls because what I discovered, rediscovered maybe, when writing the book was that for every one of our ASPX controls, we have a client-side version of those controls, and they are very rich and very detailed, and it's to facilitate client-side programming. So when you need to get into that maybe a higher torque situation where you really want some performance that maybe we don't have or that you've invented, you're going to need to write some JavaScript. And we have a JavaScript editor built into our controls. One of the neat features that I like is the client instance name on every control. And if you name one of our controls, if you provide a client instance name value, then you know exactly what to look for on the client side. You don't have to do get by name and sort of drill down into all of these nested tables and rows and things. And so it really comes in handy, and it ties right into our controls and our client-side controls. And we've had customers ask us, does the book cover your client-side controls? And rather than an individual chapter on client-side controls by themselves, it's tied in and sort of woven in throughout the entire book. And it was used quite extensively throughout the book.
Absolutely.
Very cool. Now the last chapter, or the last part of the book, and the third part is 3 chapters on Ajax, charting, reporting, and cloud computing. So what is the reporting all about? And as I understand it, that's the third author who couldn't be here today, but Joe Kunk.
Yeah, Joe Kunk pitched in and wrote that chapter. He actually is I guess we could call him a fan of extra reports. He does quite a bit of volunteer work, I would say. He sort of comes up with the ideas and pitches them. And he's been in the business for 25 years. And the book ended up being, about 250 pages more than we estimated. So Julian and Joe were kind enough to pitch in, and Joe really worked on the extra reports chapter quite a bit, and I think everybody was quite pleased with the work that he did.
Just to give you a little background, if people don't know Joe, he's a Microsoft MVP.
Joe is a Microsoft MVP. He's president of 2 .NET user groups. He's been developing .NET applications, I think 25 years now.
Right.
So he's very active in the community. More and more people know him, and I don't think you can go to an event in the Midwest where Joe is not presenting or volunteering.
Right.
And in fact, 3 or 4 months ago, he actually came into the offices to do a presentation, a webinar on extra reports, and we showed that live, and we've actually put up the video now, obviously within a couple of days of the actual webinar. So Joe knows his stuff about extra reports, and it was great to actually have him, helping out with the book on that particular chapter.
Excellent.
It was great from my point of view.
All right, now before I hit you with the cloud computing, tell us about the extra charts. I think you had some hand in that.
Yeah, I did the extra charts chapter. It was essentially an exploration of what we provide with ASP.NET charting. Not too much on the basics of charting with extra charts. Again, we had to provide a balance between providing a lot of basic information, which would have fleshed out the pages too much. It is obviously available within the help. So I tried to target specific cases where charting is more interesting in a professional way, to create different types of charts. And I had a bit of fun because I was screen scraping some ski resort data to present as charts. I'm getting really into ski resorts and skiing and all that kind of stuff. So there we go. Charting for skiers.
Excellent. So, cloud computing, what is that chapter about?
Well, originally I thought it was about the computing in the cloud. So when I wrote the original outline, I didn't have time to go through everything and at the inception and perfect conceptually what I was going to write about. So I thought it was computing in the cloud, Amazon and data servers out in the ether sphere, and it's actually about one of our controls, the ASPX cloud control, and you can read the chapter and find out about it. But it's more in the context of Developer Express, it's more about social networking, taxonomy, and things of that nature. And I know we sort of went over the table of contents at a fairly high level. But I think it's worth pointing out that we didn't skip from the ASPX grid view to charts. We covered the tree list, the scheduler. As I said, I think 99% of our ASPX controls are in the book. There are samples in the book, and some of them are very detailed. And we've done some updating online with the online content in blogs and things for the newer releases, the 9.2.8 and upcoming 9.3. So you'll find that content in there, as well as we have a CD in the book that gives our customers, I think it's 50 or 60 free controls, and they get it just for the price of the book.
Excellent. Now, as I understand, you also covered our ORM product, XPO, Express Persistent Objects.
I did. We did cover XPO. I think it has a whole chapter of its own.
Excellent.
And it's quite an interesting tool. I think it's more than an ORM tool. Traditionally, I think of an ORM tool as a tool you point at a database and you have classes and they're magically delicious. XPO actually will allow you to begin with the middleware, the classes, and it'll generate a database for you. And there's a neat section in there that Gary Short did on Twitter, I believe. It's a Twitter search, and he essentially queries Twitter for keywords and generates a database with XPO. And then XPO also has transaction management through the unit of work design pattern. So there are really three facets to XPO that make it more than an ORM tool. And I was quite pleased with the way that chapter came out.
Excellent, excellent. This book covers a lot, and looking at some of the things you talked even about, some of the differences between Windows and web applications, AJAX is covered, callbacks are covered as well, sort of just to give guys understanding. So it seems like there's really a lot covered, even just for the 600 pages, which kind of seems like not enough, right?
Well, that was one of the things we struggled with, was the page count. I mean, there was always more to add, and unfortunately, to not turn it into a dictionary, we left some things on the cutting room floor, and we'll use other venues to provide that content. But some of the examples incorporate purely .NET technologies as well. We incorporated the link in there, and some of those kinds of technologies that were fun to sort of weave into the pattern of the book.
Well, it's looking like an excellent book, and I highly recommend everybody go get a copy. If you're at PDC, these guys will be happy to sign the book if you want them to. I mean, I'm going to ask them to right now after this. So thanks again, guys.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Michael.